So we were talking about projection, which is you language, which is when people incorrectly say you when they really mean I. So, for example, if I feel sad or mad or tired or bad when I wake up on the wrong side of bed, instead of saying I feel bad, I will say you feel bad, or I will speak about a past situation, and instead of saying this person did this and I told her that or I told him that, instead they say, oh, you got to do this and you got to do that, as if they're still in that situation. So they're speaking as if they're back there still talking to the person they beef with. So that's one reason I think that people sometimes use incorrect you language rather than speaking it in past tense. Um, what do you think about projection and you language?
I'm a little curious if we can go a little deeper in the definition. So the basic definition I'm hearing is using you language when I could be used. When a person is talking about a past situation, is it including when they're using quotations describing what they said to the other person directly? Is
Uh,
that similar?
I think that I'm referring to when they incorrectly use you, because there are
Hmm.
good times to use you. If I'm specifically talking to the person individuated, like if I'm talking to you, Shirley, I'm going to say you. But if I'm talking to about a past story, like I had a story with John, I would say, "Oh yeah, John told me he was going to take out the trash, and then I told him that he told me he was going to do that, but he didn't do it." Now the bad way of saying it is, "You got to take out the trash," and then I told that to John, and then John was saying back to me, "You got to." Stop nagging me, and then I said you got to, so I just start defaulting as if my brain is transporting as if I'm still there, which that's
Hmm.
one reason why I believe that incorrect you language is a sign of unresolved processing of feelings or thoughts that
Hmm.
when a person hasn't really logically thought out their ideas, a lot of the
Hmm.
times what happens is they will just want to tell people to do things because they said so without wanting to explain themselves. And so that's when it starts getting issues. That if the person is saying, hey, you got to do this because that's our previous agreement, and so that's kind of them trying to hold us accountable, that's a good thing. But if they say, oh, Shirley, you have to blah de blah de blah, then now they're not saying any because. And so one thing I like to do is I like to ask them because, just to frame it where I want them to finish that sentence. Because so often speakers that do incorrect U language, they don't know how to escape that. And sometimes they say that that's the only way to talk, and then I tell them that that's a lack of imagination.
Hmm. I like the example that you gave where there was the quotations. So I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into that because I had a recent experience where I found myself using quotations of things that I said to somebody where I told them you XYZ. But then when I was talking about it outside of the fact, I was using that same language where I was referring to it like a storyline. For example, I'd say, so and so told me this, and then I told this person that, but then I spoke as if the person who was listening to me was that individual. So, like exactly what you said, I transported myself back in time to that conversation, but where the another person was an audience rather than the individual I was previously speaking to. And I recall when I was experiencing that conversation that my emotional state was not stable. Like there was a fluctuation of up and down to the point where I wasn't necessarily following a logical train of thought. I wasn't able to even summarize what the issue was. I was just reliving it sequence by sequence, moment by moment, and word by word.
So it seems like there was a disconnect between
Mhm.
your logical brain and your expectations of what was supposed to be happening, and then that leads to emotions. And
Can you expand on that? So my logical brain was recognizing that I was not utilizing it, but I was experiencing emotion. What expectations do you mean?
so what happens is when someone has unmet expectations, what happens is they start feeling emotions about that, which might make them panic.
Okay.
So they are
And where do those
panicking.
expectations come from? I'm so sorry.
It's internal narrative is where a person gets their expectations. So
Mhm.
if they have expectations that other people owe them things, or that other people are supposed to already understand me, but they're
Mhm.
pretending not to understand me, or I create some other narrative that creates expectations that are like other people are supposed to be able to read my mind or my body language, or they're supposed to just I said enough words that would convince me. uh,
Mhm.
so then they have that expectation that isn't met, which makes
Mhm.
them panic. And then when a person panics, their logical construction starts to decrease
Mhm.
because they're in panic mode. They get the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response where
Mhm.
they are now trying to almost bulldoze the logic because they don't have long enough neural pathways to use logic. Logic requires long neural pathways. uh, Feelings don't. Feelings is basically I stubbed my toe and I feel really bad about it. But thinking about a crucial conversation I have to have with a tenant or my landlord or my siblings when we are arguing over something that's extremely difficult, then I might panic. And that panic will make me just say, you have to give me my toy back, or give me my toy back, which has implied you language. And you language generally implies should. It's a should command. And it's a lot of it happens in people's childhood that they never grow up out of, and they might grow up around it where it's other kids doing it or their parents doing it, where the parent says do it because I said so, which is implied you should do this now because I said so. So a lot of these things, it might miss part of the frame, but the main frame is one person telling another person, you do this because I am telling you to without reason. And so if we ask the person, well, what's the reason? And the person tries to not give reason, they try to invalidate my need of a reason, then I understand that this person's now maliciously hiding something, or they are unwilling to see me as a person that deserves a explanation. And I do think that I'm a person that deserves an explanation because I respect myself, right? Do you respect yourself in that way?
Yes, I think that the what you just described of is when a person's telling somebody something and that other person, I'm going to say pushes back, um, because in my experience with this, um, where I've asked for a reason and then that reason is invalidated, like you said, it feels very like I'm being treated like less of a person.
Right. And it's when a person starts feeling like they're logically losing, they try to go for ethos or pathos. So
Hmm.
logos is the logical construction of persuasion. Ethos is the character building or appearance level of persuasion. And then pathos is more compassion and emotional appeal behind it. So when someone starts losing in logos, they go to ethos or pathos. So uh, ethos is trying to say, well, this person I'm talking to, they have a bad character. They can't even they flunked out of their classes, or look at them, they can't even keep a relationship, or look at them, blah, blah, blah. So they try to damage the person's character by doing a character attack. Because if I can damage a person's character, then it starts to invalidate them in the mind of the audience, or so the projector thinks. And so the projector is trying to project some of these ideas, but the idea is that a lot of the projector's ideas are things that they had to think of in their own life. Because a lot of times people who project, they don't have a grand perspective. A lot of their perspective is very limited, especially because they don't know how to have a perspective that would be persuasive according to the person that they're talking to. But I do like what you brought up. You brought up the thing about role-playing, where a person will talk about the past, but then say you language as if they're still there, which is almost as if they're talking to someone who isn't even there. They're talking to a ghost of like a memory of the past. And it prevents the theory of mind. The theory of mind is the theory that everybody has their own ideas, their own behaviors and beliefs, their own personal story that's unique, and that they spend a lot of time developing skills, or they have a lot of user errors in possibly good behaviors. They might do it incorrectly because they are incompetent, or let's say they have competency in things that we don't even see. But that's the theory of mind. And so a person who projects makes it seem like the person that they're projecting to is not even a person that it like makes them the person that they're talking to in the past. So instead, so sometimes they do it correctly, where they are role playing, and they do it correctly where they say the person I was talking to told me you got to take out the trash, and then I told them. So it's kind of framing the narrative as if it's a role play. But other people don't frame it like a role play, and they just say you language the whole time. But then again,
You're making a distinction between a person who's maintained the frame that it's dialogue going back and forth, and then there are other examples where the person is slipping into the dialogue as if it's happening now, even though it happened in the past.
right, and as if they can have the same exact dialogue with the person that they're currently talking to. It's almost
Interesting.
like the conversation never stopped in their head.
Yeah.
So the conversation never stopped, but the person they're talking to now is a new person who has to be brought into the conversation, or agree to going into the conversation. Because so often people become conversational hostages in this respect, where a person has all this emotional baggage, like someone did wrong to them, and then the next person they talk to, or one of the 5 next people that they talk to, they start role playing as if it's already there with the other person. It's like back to the part that I'm not done yet. And so the person that's the interlocutor, which is the person that's in the conversation with me, if I'm a projector, will then think, wait, I'm now a hostage to this role play, playing a character I don't want to play. Because now they are now being the person that I am, like, an opponent to. So I think there's less consent in it. I think it's much better to ask the person if they want to talk about what happened, rather than just to get towards, so they did this, said this to me, I said this to them, I said this to me, and the da-da-da. So often that it leads to, so one of my main points is that it leads to more intellectual hostages, conversational hostages. Because there's so many reasons why.
One of your main points about you language is
Yeah.
that it leads to conversational hostages.
Yeah, conversational hostages. Yeah, because it's making me a hostage to their role play.
Their unresolved role play of emotion.
Yeah, because they expected their interpersonal relationship with someone in the past to go one way, and it didn't. Maybe the conversation wasn't over because it was their choice, or maybe for whatever reason the other person had to leave because time constraint, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're in the shower later and they're like, oh my gosh, I could have totally said this to them and totally zinged them and got it. So they have like the shower thoughts. And so they get all these shower thoughts that they start adding up in their tank, all this extra stuff in their tank. And the next person even shows a sign, even a glimpse that they're receptive to listening to a long form conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The shower thinker will then just start dumping all their shower thoughts onto the person as if
Mm-hmm.
they're back in that previous dialogue with someone that's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a biggest opponent of my frame against you language incorrectly being used are the people that try to say, well, you language is you universal. You language is you generic. And in my perspective, if they really mean that, then they should use a word that's actually relating to those things. If they mean you universal, they can say, oh, others I've met are like this. They can do the specific universal cluster population.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cluster population of anybody that is in front of that they're talking to, or the you, it's a non-descriptive. It's very intellectually limiting. And so my one of my main responses to that is that it's intellectually limiting to be able to more accurately articulate and describe the population that they're referring to. If it's a generic population, then what is that generic population? If it's a universal all humans, or all humans of a certain type of culture, or a certain type of gender, or a certain type of intellectual proclivity, like a community, like, oh, fishermen people, they prefer this way, or gamer people, they like to speed up the videos when they do this. And so a lot of times people are talking with you language with universal, but the universal relates to the community that they're used to.
Right.
It's within their own milieu. I don't know how many people know what milieu is, but it's.
I don't know what milieu is. Can you tell me what that means?
Let me look it up so I can make sure I don't do it wrong here. So milieu spelled Milieu.
Milieu,
Yeah, I don't know if you heard it or not,
Yeah, I
but
heard it.
yeah. So
milieu,
milieu, it's a French psychological term that I learned when I was training to become a psychiatric professional. And milieu refers to, it's almost like the fishbowl idea, where we're all fish in our own fishbowl. And anytime a new concept, a new cultural meme, anytime I watch a show, any sort of programming I take and receive in my life that enters my milieu or exits my milieu based on my forgetfulness or based on my negligence to try to remember. So
Hmm.
my milieu is almost like my own environment. There's some parts of
Mm-hmm.
my environment that I cannot change, and getting a bigger bowl takes a lot of effort. uh,
Hmm.
so when it comes to milieu is the actual technical term
Hmm.
uh, that's used in in the profession. But when it comes to like my fishbowl, what happens is if a person's milieu is only the community of gaming, only the community of maybe some sports, maybe working out, maybe they go online to social media, maybe they watch some TV shows, so they're a cinephile, they're really into movies.
Hmm.
Let's say there's a couple of other habits they have in their life,
Hmm.
but that now is just their milieu. So their understanding of you universal is only you universal according to
Mm-hmm.
the limitation of their milieu.
Right. That's a really interesting definition. Okay, so we've covered a lot of things, and I do have a couple things I want to add and also ask you about.
Yeah.
Okay, so in summary of what you just said, you language is a way that allows for a conflation of what one person's milieu is with another person's milieu. So it's assuming that both parties have a similar expectation of what the common you is.
Right. Different understanding of society.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that they have similar understanding of what that population is. But that population is you, which is there's a lot of different yous.
Right.
And so if they are speaking to a you, quote unquote, that you, it's much better articulated if they explain the cluster of that personality type. So if they say, oh, gamers tend to watch porn more than non-gamers because they're around the computer more often, or if they say when people take Tylenol, sometimes they don't take enough, and then they start using you language when it's really just a personal experience that I've dealt with. So what it does is it makes it seem like this is when I get into my point about the lack of I language. Because what happens is a lot of times when someone says you, they meant a population cluster. Another time when they use incorrect you language, they're actually replacing saying I with their own experiences. They're replacing that with you. So instead of saying I felt bad today, they said you felt bad today. Or when someone divorces you, it tends to fuck you up. But really, they're the one that got divorced, and they're the ones that got all messed up. And so what it transfers. It's called transference. They're transferring. So one is projection and one is transference. So transference is when, so I might be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but transference is when someone transfers their own feelings onto others. Well, it's like they instead of saying I, they say you. And the reason why they transfer it is because it helps them take less responsibility over their own emotions, which helps.
That's exactly where I was going to go to.
Which is it's a false virtue signal, because they're signaling that they don't feel that way, you feel that way, but that's how they say it. And so what happens is now their brain doesn't have to think of it with I language, which a lot of people think, well, that doesn't really matter too much because consciously we know that it's them that's feeling it, but unconscious is not as smart. Unconscious is saying that to get around it unconsciously. They're getting around owning their emotions unconsciously.
Right. So there's two different ways that you language can be misused. One is using it as a generalization of an entire population, which is conflating other people's milieus with their own. It's also using you language, which could have been used as I language. So either one is assuming or assigning an idea or opinion to another, either a group or an individual.
Right. Right. And then the third one is the role playing conversation
Role playing conversations, which
where
we talked about.
right, which is
And that would
the
be unresolved emotional
yeah. Which leads
experience.
to conversational hostages, which
Mhm.
I rarely ever remember someone asking me if I want to run through where I'm the bad guy in their story.
What that would be incredible though if people I mean for example, I can recall at least two conversations I had yesterday where because you have helped me to recognize you language as something that I use in my own language, it gave me an opportunity to step back as I was committing this hostage situation on a person I was speaking to. But I mean, it's interesting because if I'm aware that I'm doing that, then I can ask that person for consent, and it can be a tool for me to work through the emotional situation that I had. I do actually have a couple notes on that, but I wanted to say one more thing regarding this U language concept, if I can
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think might be a interesting summary of it is if a person is utilizing you language and it's doing these three things, it's um, forcing another person to be the other party, it's generalizing a population, or it's assigning an opinion that somebody else has, then what an effect that they're doing is they're also hiding their accountability of what general or specific is, which is what you said your biggest opponents use as an argument, is that, well, it's you general, or it's you or you specific.
So they
And
say you universal or you generic. Those are the two
you
things.
universal or you generic. So, but the thing that's interesting about that is because we're using the same word you, there's a loophole where that individual can say, well, I didn't say you specific, I meant you general, or I didn't mean you general, I meant you universal. So it's not requiring them to be challenged to make sure they're using a specific measurement that can actually be assessed logically.
Right, and another thing is that they are trying to do a pathos or ethos argument where they're trying to focus on who's saying it and what's being said by
Mm.
who, rather than the logic. And
So they're
that
hiding
if
fraud. Hmm.
the logic is superlative, if the logic is amazing, it should stand on itself. Because
Mm-hmm.
anytime I've talked to an inmate, anytime I've talked to a patient, and I give them an amazing option for their life, I don't even tell them to do it, and they do it. Because they see it right in front of them, and they go, wow, Battlefield Philosophy told me if I get out of bed too fast, I might get lightheaded, and that I should instead dangle my feet off the bed to help my blood reach equilibrium correctly, or however it's termed, and then before they get out of bed too fast. So when I tell them about that phenomenon according to what I think about it in my own narrative to me, I don't even have to tell them to do it. And they just do it. Because they start seeing it as an amazing option. So I prefer to give an option as this is the option that's available, and let my interlocutor make the choice for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so assigning an opinion is not persuasive,
Right.
as having the
Right.
person recognize it as an example, standing on its own, that they can then choose to apply to themselves rather than being told to apply it to themselves.
Right. And that's what happens to a lot of times, is that they get emotional about it, and then they jump past logic and just say, you do this, and
Mm-hmm.
because they're frustrated about explaining. And a lot of times they don't have time, but in other times they don't have the intellectual bandwidth. So that's the question: is are they trying to force me because they don't have the time? Are they
Mm-hmm.
trying to force me because they don't have the cognition, like a cognition error? Or is
Either
it,
way, it sounds like it's a time issue.
or
Either
is,
time investment or
well, yeah, but
time
and time
utilized.
deviates into its own reasoning also, where
Mhm.
when a lot of people have their own patience clock.
Mhm.
A patience clock that is ticking down every single minute that or second that goes by of someone not getting it.
Yeah. Or
uh,
not getting it in what their expectation is.
yeah, so there's a patience clock, which is more of an internal thing, and then there's an
Mhm.
external thing of like, I gotta go. Like, I have scheduling. So I think scheduling is the other
Right.
way I frame it, scheduling.
Right.
So there's scheduling issues, and then there's the patience clock
That's
underneath.
interesting because the conversations I alluded to previously, the feedback I got that was emotional from the other people was the emotion was exacerbated and amplified based off of these two different types of clocks. Mostly scheduling external clocks, but it presents very similarly to, at least in these examples, to what I've seen as people losing patience as well.
Yeah. Right. So that's time that I've thought about. So with cognition, they
Mhm.
they they have it's like one level is they currently have bad mental bandwidth, so they're exhausted. So maybe they're exhausted. Their intellect is exhausted, or they never had the equipment in the first place. Because there's so often that when someone's talking about something, they don't have the articulation lexicon. They don't have the vocabulary that's required to explain what they need. Or maybe the listener doesn't have it either. It might be the listener's fault. That maybe the listener is not able to understand the vocabulary. However, it's my opinion or my belief that it's always the speaker's fault to detect these things. If a speaker cannot detect that the listener does not have the tools to understand, then the speaker should be able to ask them a question which is not saying, you know? It should be instead, how much do you know about this? Or what do you know about this? As a way for me to see if my listener even has the capacity to follow me. Because if I ask that question, if I ask Shirley, if I say, hey, Shirley, how much do you know about projection? Or how have you heard about this before? Asking these questions that try to gauge my interlocutor's experience, my listener's experience, I can try to tailor my speech more towards the layman or more towards a person who probably has more vocabulary than me. But then there's another issue that happens if I'm talking to someone that has more vocabulary or more research or has more study behind what I'm talking about. They might have a semantic issue. And the semantic issue is because they learned those terms before me and that they have already pre-understood connotation for those words. So sometimes I'll say the word upset, and a lot of people conflate the term upset with the term mad or angry or frustrated, that they conflate all these terms meaning the exact same thing. But all these terms are not all the exact same thing. If I think that all the terms are the exact same thing, that is a word concept fallacy. Or it's like thinking that the word's concept are as easy as the word itself, even though each one of these vocabulary terms has a distinction to it. So, like, conflate is when multiple terms are seen as similar, the same, or they mix up what these terms mean. So what might happen is I might explain something, and they know upset to mean angry. So when I'm saying, oh, are you getting upset? They think I'm are claiming that they're starting to be mad. But when I'm saying upset, it usually is relating to like an upset in sports, where it's, uh-oh, it's like, hold on, it's an upset where something was not expected. So an upset is generally, in my perspective, upset relates to unmet expectations has been reached. We haven't, that expectations are all of a sudden deviating. And so when expectations are deviating, that's when someone tends to get upset, and how much they care about that upset is going to be amplified by their emotional attachment to their belief. So they have a lot of emotional attachment to the belief and their unmet expectation. They get a lot of mad about that. But then an upset might also create people, might lead to people becoming stoked about it, right? When there's a huge upset in sports, they go, whoa, right? Like a surprise, like almost like a startle or a almost like an exhilaration. And then, so that's it because an upset almost is relating to a panic in my perspective. And so when someone gets upset, it means that they have some level of response, but they haven't yet articulated what type of emotion are they feeling in relation to that unmet expectation.
Say that last part again. Your level of response, what?
Yeah, so when someone gets upset, it gets amplified. Like how emotional they get is then defined by their internal monologue. So if they have an upset because their expectation wasn't met, then then it starts going towards their emotional response to what they believe. Maybe I'm not thinking about it correctly here because I said it really well in my perspective, but then I couldn't get it well again. So when it comes to an upset, the person has unmet expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're panicking. And then sometimes that panic might be exacerbated because of their beliefs about it. If their beliefs is that they really, 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 really didn't want it to be that way, then they're going to be a lot more angry or be a lot more amplified in whatever emotional direction they go. So, for example, if someone doesn't like me, then they might, it might be because they have expectations for me that were not met. And then let's say it's even worse now, and now it has maybe they have moral, what's it called? What's it called when someone, moral outrage, right? Let's say I'm doing something that to them is morally outrageous, right? Like, let's say I am eating shellfish, but in their religion, eating shellfish is deserving of hell, right? So for them, they're now believing that I'm on like the devil's team or something. So that emotional outrage comes from that moral outrage, which makes their upset amplified equal to how much they expected for what someone should be to be virtuous. Because these expectations relate to people's virtue self-belief or virtue belief of what other people are supposed to have. So
Right.
a lot of people have expectations and optimism about everyone they talk to, where they expect everyone else to be a hero, but really a lot of people are just their own anti-hero, where everybody's living their life according to their own prerogatives and according to their own milieu of what they're have in their life.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't realize that there are other people out there that their expectations is that we cannot swim too far and that we cannot persuade others. And so a common projection, which is almost a self-report, because that's another thing, is a self-report. A self-report is when someone says you language, but they're really just speaking for what their own self is. And that's for people that have a small milieu. When a person has a very small milieu, then the only thing they can go off of what they can see within themselves. So they're only used to using a hammer, so everything looks like a nail, right? So every time they see someone else getting mad, in their milieu, getting mad is only one thing in their mind. They are not aware of other perspectives on why someone could get mad. But as people get older, they start realizing, wow, I can also get mad about taxes. I can also get mad about that people in my life are dying off. I'm getting mad that I'm losing my friends because they are moving to other states or other countries. So there's so many other ways that people can get mad and makes it more complex. And especially when the anger relates to things we cannot control. And that's when it comes down to people get stuck trying to fix things they cannot control. Because I remember before we started recording, you were talking about how there are people that get stuck in their emotions.
I observed what that appeared to be that in a conversation I was having. And it's interesting because it relates a little bit to some of the topics that you've brought up. So I made a note a couple minutes back regarding how I have observed myself processing this type of dialogue. And I think that this is a progression of stages, and it applies to what I think I observed in what you just referenced regarding people getting stuck in their emotions. So when I'm in conversation with somebody, or if I've just experienced something and maybe I haven't quite figured it out logically, I've noticed that both internally and also externally, I tend to communicate about it in sequence, like time-oriented sequence. This person said this person said that, I did this, I did that, like that.
Yeah,
And,
chronological order.
and this is my attempt to try to make some sort of sense out of it in my mind. But this is also where I might have a trap that I am inadvertently holding somebody hostage in a conversation if I haven't emotionally processed it and I haven't asked for their consent and me communicating in that way, because sometimes I start to have elevated emotion as I'm working through that in sequence. Once I've worked through that, either on my own or with the assistance of another person, I am then able to summarize the situation. It's more concise and it's also less emotional. And I can still refer back to the sequence if I need to. And then the next step would be I'm able to offer some sort of analysis of the summary and analysis of the specifics. And what I observed in that conversation, it was two different conversations about a similar topic, is that I was trying to communicate summary and analysis, and the other people had uncommunicated and unmet expectations that were causing them to have an emotional response. So if I was choosing to move forward describing the summary and the analysis of wherever I was in the discussion, they would tend to reintroduce a sequential or non-sequential incident that they had an emotion about, regardless of where the conversation had gone. For example, my logical answer was related to their logical response to a question that I had or to a statement that they made. But then we're
Can you
heading
give an
back to
example?
time.
Because I want to make sure that you're getting a lot of theoretics, and I want to understand the more specifics
Sure,
of
of
the
course.
example.
I mean, I
Yeah.
don't want to give too specifics,
Yeah. You
but
can always
yeah,
change
yeah.
names of things. Yeah.
The other part about this, and this is a question and also a potential observation that I'm looking at, is emotion is a good guidepost, but it can also be an obstacle to progression and also to logic. I mean, I know that that sounds very intuitive, but I'm trying to look at it in terms of an actual situation, because outside of the experience, I can see it as an obstacle, but inside of the experience, I don't necessarily see it as an obstacle. And I don't think that the individuals that I was referring to in that previous example, they didn't see the emotion as an obstacle. They saw it as the focal point. So we kept going back to it.
So it seems like we're talking about role playing, and that sometimes people role play to jog their own memory, and then they sometimes role play because they have unfinished business.
I mean, that's what I've observed about myself. I don't know if that applies exactly to the other conversations that I mentioned briefly. But I found myself, as they were increasing in their upsetness, that I, over a period of time, as my patients, meaning like, what did you call it? You said like emotional patients. It was
Yeah.
as if they were attempting to utilize emotion and the passage of time and the repetition of time and statements to persuade me to changing the path that we were on.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there's sometimes people do what's called boredom blockades, or they do boredom attacks, where they filibuster by trying to emotionally drain their interlocutors, where they try to bring up random tangents, they try to bring up random ideas, they don't really have any sort of aim. The whole idea is just to tire out their listener, so that way the listener will then give in.
Right.
And
That's and
so
that's
in response to that, I always do my triple down method.
triple what?
My triple down method,
Mm-hmm.
which is my own like idea. So a triple down method is, so first there's when someone says something to me, and they're my opponent, I can back down and just give in to them. The other method is doubling down, where I say, no, I'm still in here. I'm still going to defend my argument against what they're trying to say to me. And then tripling down is when I encourage my opponent to give more explanation. And so a triple down is great because a lot of the ego does not like to give more explanation. So if they think that they are tiring me out and I am basically suggesting that my fetish is to debate with them, then now they realize they're not tiring me out, they're only giving me more energy.
Right.
So I've done this with many managers, I've done this with many different staff members, that it seems like they are trying to tire me out, and then there's like a lull in the conversation, and then I ask them, wait, why did they stop? They should keep going. And then
That's a very good method. I think that would have worked. And I mean, I wouldn't say I went as aggressively. I'm not necessarily in aggressively meaning like unrelenting, like it sounds like you've described. I didn't take the path of being that persistent, but I think I will definitely do that going forward, because eventually I didn't leave. I didn't choose to leave out of exhaustion or time. The other person in both cases chose to leave because they were done.
yeah, and that done could be either a scheduling issue or the
Yes.
time patience issue.
Yes. Correct.
So
Well, and also that method of triple down, there is also an opportunity to learn something.
right. And so it's so funny that
It's
I'm giving you
there.
all these new methods that are right off the skillet of my what I'm writing in my book. But one of the other ideas is what I call the milk method. The milk method is to try to not add anything new, but to just to keep asking questions. And so when this person's trying to say to me that I have to do this, I have to do that, they're saying you language to me, they're saying you gotta do this. The milk method would be me asking them, can they help me understand that a little bit more? Can they explain themselves a little more? I want to understand what they mean by that. So it's me not giving my position, it's just me milking them for more information. And if every milking attempt I do for more information of what they're coming at me with comes to dry, nothing's coming out, it's the idea that they're trying to steamroll me with commands without reasons. And so I get into the milk method, which is very similar to the question blockade. The question blockade is when I blockade a person with questions. Anytime they ask me a question, I ask them a question. It's just a game of question chicken. Question chicken is both people asking each other questions, and no one wants to give answers.
Interesting. I'm very curious to learn more about these specific communication methods that you have, especially regarding like one, working with people that are experiencing heightened levels of emotion, and also if they are not recognizing the you language, like universal or specific. Because like the purpose that I'm interested in this in is, personally I want to grow, and then also I want to be more effective in communicating with other people. But I also acknowledge that not everybody necessarily cares about, changing their language or changing their you language. Like I have to adapt to it however it is presented to
And
me.
I'm glad you brought this. Kind of jogged my memory with. So when you said there's you universal, there's also you generic, and then there's you individuated.
Oh, I keep messing up how we're just defining
I
it.
mean,
Okay, I'm gonna
it
write
can
it
be
down.
it can be
Universe. I have it written down, but I've written it down differently every single time.
I'm
You
sure it can be
universe.
said in multiple different ways, but
Uh-huh.
the reason why I say individuated is because it articulates that a lot of people are not individuated. They're very tribe mentality. They're very, my mom told me so. My dad told me so. My professor told me so. The person on the internet told me so. And so they transfer that with the exact same language that the person that told them that. So a lot of times this you command is commanded to the person who's now commanding me. So that's why a lot of times I try to ask the person who told them this. And that way I can try to figure out that they're just using this person as a pylon. They're using this person as a proxy. This person is just a microphone for the other person. So I really want to know who's speaking into the microphone rather than talking to the microphone to the other person. Because not only that, but it's also the game of telephone. If I'm talking to the microphone of that person, now that person is going to play telephone when they bring it back to the other person that's actually the person I'm trying to talk with. So if I talk to person A, I find out there's person B that's talking to person A. Person A is now the middleman. That a lot of times, in my perspective, I believe that they are non-reliable or unreliable historians or unreliable narrators. They have unreliable competency. And so I don't want to rely on them to convey my concepts to the person B. I'd rather ask them, so who's person B? Also asking them, how much do they believe what they say? Because sometimes people bring up random ideas because they themselves are challenged with those ideas and they are trying to find any reason to try to confront it, right? It's like someone gave them this instruction and they don't believe in the instruction, but that's all they have as their only option. So they say, oh, well, you can't change anybody's mind. And then I ask this person, what makes them think that? Who told them that? And then they go, oh, well, I mean, that's what I heard. I don't think that, but I hear that all the time.
Interesting.
So now they're just repeating what someone else says, and they don't have their own ideas. So then I ask them, so what do they think about that? And they say, oh, no, I don't think that. Then I ask them, why'd they bring it up then? Why'd they bring it up if they don't believe it? So it seems like sometimes people play a game, and when they start to lose the game, they pretend like they weren't playing the game.
Right.
So it's the whole idea is where if they lose the game, they change the game, which is called moving the goalpost.
Right.
So that's why I use the Richard Dawkins effect, where it's my own idea, but it's based off Richard Dawkins, which what he does is every time someone makes a claim, like a you claim, he always asks that person to support their claims. So he'll ask them, how long have they studied this for? How long have they held this belief for? When did this belief start? What are the reasons that support their beliefs? So he starts to make them pour concrete onto their ideas.
Right.
And the more concrete they, figuratively speaking, the more concrete they build, the less they can earthquake out of it, the less they can try to shake themselves out of the foundations, because I'm basically forcing them to build the earthquake for their own ideas. I'm forcing them to provide me the foundation for their claim. Because if they don't provide any foundations, then they can just go, oops, my bad, I meant that other thing. But if I, for a whole 30 minutes, am asking them, who told them, where did this idea start, how long have they held this belief for, how much percentage do they believe that it's true? Because sometimes I ask a person, what percentage do they believe in what they tell me? Sometimes they'll say, I only believe in this 30%. And I say, okay, what's the other 70%? And then they say, well, 10% is more of the unknown. And then the other 60% is something else. So then I ask, why did they bring up the non-primacy idea? So a primacy idea, like the primacy effect, is that the controlling reason or the forefront reason is the reason that the person holds as in the highest degree certainty, confidence that this is true. And so when it comes to the primacy effect, usually people are supposed to, in my perspective at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, but people are supposed to believe in the idea that they're most convinced of, which is a pretty easy ask. Like, do you want to believe in what you're most convinced of? Yes or no?
Well, and echoing back to the
Well, hold on.
conversation
Do you agree or disagree with that?
Sorry, what?
Do you agree that that people are supposed to believe in what they're most convinced of?
Based on the example that we were talking about, where you're asking them to define what percentage they believe something in,
Yeah.
I would assume that it would be above 50%. There would be no other idea that would win out over that. But if
Well,
the idea
it could be
is
under
below,
50%. I'm stopping you there because I have an opponent idea there. So the idea is that it could be under 50% if there's more than two ideas. They might have a whole slew of ideas and they've lost track of how many ideas they have. So they might have 20% here, 10% there, 20% there, 30% there, 10% here, 5% there, and they're just so lost, especially if I sat down and asked them all their options and all their ideas and started actually trying to chart and having them allocate their confidence points. It's like allocating their resource of confidence into their beliefs. I think that's such an interesting concept to do as a counselor.
right. I mean, so when you presented the idea of percentage, I was assuming that there was a dichotomy of ideas. So that's why I chose the 50% mark, because it was in response to you commenting on a 30% mark. And then there was the why are you bringing up the low? I don't remember what word you used, but the idea that's the low on the lower end.
Yeah, a
And
non-primacy
if you're
idea.
assuming that there's more than one idea, for example, 8 ideas, then 30% could be the highest
I also want
based
to
on.
see how much degree of certainty do they have in their own confidence, because sometimes they'll say, my belief is that I have 60% belief that this is what's happening, and then I'll ask them how confident are they in that, and then even that question itself will make them lower that number, which makes me go, okay, this person's just freeballing it. They're not fixed. Like they're not. There's not much concrete that they've poured for this idea. Like a lot of religious people, they pour a lot of concrete, and over the years, over the decades, that concrete now settles, and then it starts getting really firm. But a lot of people, when they have beliefs, they will have it for maybe a day or two, or maybe just a year, and so the concrete isn't yet fully entrenched into their neural pathways. The longer the neural pathway, it's my belief that the longer the neural pathways have been used to firing a certain way, the more it's comfortable as the default when a person autopilots in their unconscious. When someone's autopiloting their ideas, they're going to their most comfortable and favorite neural pathways. They're going to their most favorite ways of thinking. And so a lot of when someone is running out of intellectual resources, it's the cognition exhaustion that I was talking about before. And a lot of times people are used to U language from watching TV shows. And a lot of TV shows are a lot of U language, which I've noticed that more often now, which is part of the psyop. Because this whole entire idea of incorrect U language, it seems like it's so infectious and so invasive and so contagious, like it's so prevalent in society that I don't think it's by coincidence. I think that.
Oh, I'm gonna have to head out in a second.
Oh, okay, yeah, and we're at an
No,
hour
no,
right now,
that's
so that's
good.
perfect time.
I definitely want to. I mean, that's a good one to maybe do the next discussion on, is talking about its pervasiveness in society.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was a good conversation. It was about an hour, and we'll bring this up another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Battlefield.
All right,
Bye bye.
bye.